There's a moment in this story you will not forget. A man walks through the wrong door at Massachusetts General Hospital on a cold December night. He is already singing when he realizes the woman in the bed is not his grandmother. She is in a coma. She will wake. And when she does, she will learn something that changes the direction of her life. The man the hospital tried to silence had once sung her back toward the living. He had no idea she chaired the foundation that funded the very floor he stood on. Hold that. December 14th, 2024. Boston. The cold that evening had real texture, something between wet gravel and glass. Massachusetts General Hospital stood along Fruit Street, its upper windows burning white against the dark sky. The parking lot was half empty at 7 in the evening. Daniel Carter crossed it with his collar turned up, his breath disappearing in small clouds behind him. Daniel was 36 years old, widowed, black, a facilities technician on the hospital's evening rotation. He kept the floors clean and the utility rooms orderly. He had done this work for 4 years, through Miriam's illness and then the long quiet after. Her absence had settled into the apartment on Shawmut Avenue, like something with real weight. He kept the job because it had good benefits. Ava needed stability more than she needed him to be ambitious. Ava was 8 years old, and she noticed everything. She had pressed a folded drawing into his breast pocket before he left that evening, both small hands pushing it flat against his chest. "Get a great Nana from me," she said. She had drawn a yellow house with an enormous sun. Daniel kissed her forehead and walked out into the cold with that paper tucked close. His grandmother, Nana Ruth, had been on the 4th floor for 11 days recovering from a complicated hip replacement. Daniel came every evening after his shift. He always brought something small. Tonight, it was daisies from the CVS on Cambridge Street, white-petaled and slightly wilted. He carried them the way you carry something that stands for a feeling you cannot otherwise name. He took the elevator to the 4th floor. He moved past the nurse's station and nodded once to a woman in scrubs who did not look up. He turned left toward room 412. The fluorescent light was flat and constant above him. A cart rolled on linoleum somewhere out of sight. He pushed open the door and stepped inside and stopped. The room was the same shape as Nana Ruth's. Same white walls, same narrow bed, same mechanical hum from the corner. But the woman in the bed was not his grandmother. She was younger, somewhere in her mid-30s. Her face held the particular stillness that comes when the body beneath has surrendered ordinary will. An endotracheal tube was taped at the corner of her mouth. Thin lines ran from her wrist to a monitor. The ventilator lifted her chest and released it and lifted it again, metronomic and indifferent. Room 410. He had misread the number in the corridor. There were no cards on the windowsill, no photographs, no flowers, nothing personal to distinguish the white of this room from any other white in the building. A single pen lay uncapped on the meal tray, as though someone had meant to return and had not yet. He should have backed out quietly. He nearly did. Then he looked at her hand, resting open on the sheet, palm upward, fingers slightly apart. It was the posture of a hand that had withdrawn from the practice of expectation. Not peace. Exhaustion. Daniel had worn that same thing himself in the months after Miriam died, when he stopped trying to hold himself together and simply waited. He stood there for a long moment. The ventilator kept its count. He set the daisies on the window ledge as carefully as if noise might disturb something that still held. He pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down. He pressed his palms flat against his knees, breathed once, and closed his eyes. Then Daniel Carter opened his mouth and began to sing. The song had already left his lips before Daniel Carter understood where he was. He had pushed his custodian cart past room 410, intending to reach 412. His mother was 3 days out from surgery, recovering on the same floor. His hands were full, grocery store daisies, a folded card, and the door had drifted open under his shoulder at the wrong moment. The room was dim, lit only by corridor amber through the glass. He set the flowers on the sill and began to sing. He had not yet noticed that the woman beneath the pale sheet was not his mother. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." He sang it the way he always had, not for performance, but for presence. It It was the song he sang to Ava when thunderstorms shook the apartment windows. It was the song he'd sung to Denise in her final weeks, when words had felt too small. He sang it here the same way. Mop handle leaned against the wall. He did not know her name. He did not know she had been in that room for 7 full weeks. He did not know that not one visitor had come through that door with any warmth. Nurse Lily heard him from the hallway before she reached the door. She had worked the ICU night shift at Carver Regional for 6 years. She had never once walked into a patient's room to find the custodian mid-verse with daisies on the ledge. She stopped in the doorway and pressed her clipboard to her chest. For a moment, she simply stood, unwilling to interrupt the sound. His voice was not a trained voice. It moved the way old floors move when a house settles, worn down and entirely honest. It sounded less like music and more like deliberate company, like someone making the choice to stay. She cleared her throat softly. Daniel jolted hard. The daisies slid from the ledge, and he caught them with both hands. Petals scattered across the sill. His face went hot. "I'm sorry," he said. "Wrong room. I didn't mean any harm." Lily held a beat. "It's all right," she said. "Your mother is in 412. Just 2 doors down." She crossed to check the 4 line, keeping her voice low from long habit. Then she glanced at the woman in the bed. "This is Vanessa Cole. She chairs the Hospital Foundation Board, CEO of Cole Technologies. Galaxy Don. 7 weeks ago." A pause opened in the room. "Not one family member has come," Lily added. Her tone was matter-of-fact, the way nurses learn to deliver hard numbers without flinching. Daniel looked at the hand resting on the white sheet. The fingers lay loose and still, the way hands look when the body has gone somewhere the mind cannot follow. 7 weeks, he said quietly. Not a question, just the weight of it given air. He carried the daisies 2 doors down and sat with his mother for 40 minutes. She had grievances about the dinner rolls, the television reception, and the way the overnight aide knocked. He listened to every word and kissed her forehead before he left. In the elevator, he stood with his hands in his pockets, thinking about a hand resting alone on a white sheet. He drove home to the apartment on Delwood Avenue. The kitchen light was still on. Ava had anchored a permission slip to the table with a hot sauce bottle. She knew he'd never move it without reading what was underneath first. She was already asleep in her room, one arm flung wide, a library book splayed open across her ankle. He tucked the blanket up around her and turned off the lamp without waking her. He stood in the kitchen in the quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The radiator knocked once against the baseboard, then went still. He thought about the winter. Ava had a fever of 103. He had sat on the edge of her bed for 4 hours in the dark. No book, no phone, just present. When the fever finally broke and her eyes came open, she had looked up at him and said, "I knew you were here, Daddy. I could feel you." He had not forgotten that. The next evening after his shift at Carver Regional, he pushed his cart past 412 and stopped 2 doors short. He tapped on 410 and stepped inside. He sat in the chair by the window and sang "Here Comes the Sun" in a voice barely above a whisper. The machines kept their rhythm. The room kept its silence. He came back the following night, and the night after that, working slowly through whatever arrived to him on the drive over, some Beatles, some Simon and Garfunkel, whatever felt right when he sat down. He never knew whether any of it reached her. He came anyway. The hymns came naturally once the silence between them settled. Daniel had grown up at Morning Star Baptist on Clover Avenue, with a choir numbered 4, and the congregation clapped regardless of harmony. He knew those songs the way he knew the creak of his own kitchen floor. He let them go now in a low, unhurried voice, nothing performed, nothing aimed upward in petition, just the old shapes of melody released into the antiseptic air of the room. Then he began to talk. He talked the way a man talks when his reasons for guardedness have quietly dissolved. He told her about Ava's mother, about the cancer that came fast before Ava ever started school. He came home from the hospital that last night and found her grocery list on the refrigerator door. Her handwriting, careful block print. He had never thrown it away. He told her about the maintenance job at Hargrove Community College on Marcus Drive. Night shifts, long corridors under fluorescent light. He told her about watching a hair-braiding tutorial on his phone at 11 at night. The same 3-minute clip, 7 times through, Ava patient between his knees on a kitchen chair. He got it wrong 3 tries before she said softly, "Dad, you're going the wrong way." She was 6 years old. She was entirely right. He told her about a Saturday at the discount store on 5th. Ava had stood before the juice box shelf for 9 full minutes. She studied each label with the gravity of someone who understood the stakes. He waited beside the cart without rushing her. Some things could not be hurried. He had learned just because they were small. Then he told her about a Tuesday in February, 2 winters back. He had pulled into the lot outside Ridgeway Memorial and stopped the engine. The windshield went slowly white with fog. He had nowhere left to be and could not bring himself home to the quiet apartment. He sat for close to 40 minutes. "That was the loneliest I have ever been," he said. "Not one person to call." He looked at her still face in the pale glow of the monitors. "I think you might know something about that kind of quiet," he said. "The kind that fills a room even when the world believes you have everything." Vanessa Cole heard every word. She could not open her eyes or move her hands toward the light. Consciousness had not left her entirely. It had narrowed to something dim. From there, sound reached her the way music carries across open water. His voice arrived first as sensation and only slowly as meaning. Low, unhurried. It carried no agenda and asked nothing of her. She had spent 20 years in rooms where every voice was bringing something it needed returned. This one brought nothing. It kept arriving, and she found herself pressing toward it from wherever she had gone. She had built Cole Technologies from a 2-room apartment on the east side of the city. She had earned every title through costs she had not always let herself name. And in these still weeks of lying motionless, she had begun a slow reckoning with what all of it had actually cost. He returned the evening before Christmas, carrying 2 photographs from the pharmacy counter on Geneva Street. Small prints in a plain white envelope. He set them against her water pitcher. "That's Ava," he said. "She's 8. She supervised the printing very seriously." He paused. She supervised it twice. He strung battery-powered lights along the windowsill. Ava had chosen them from the store display, hands behind her back, fully deliberate. He had not hurried her. Before leaving the apartment that evening, she had pressed a folded square of paper into his coat pocket without a word. He smoothed it open and fixed it to the wall beside the monitor with medical tape. Crayon lines drew a tall figure beside a narrow bed. Yellow stars ran along the top edge. At the bottom, in careful round letters, "For the lady who is sleeping." "We are not alone," he said. "Not really. I believe kindness travels. It finds its way back." Nurse Marlene came through the door at 10:30. She checked the monitor readings and said quietly, "Your visits matter. Her numbers settle when you are here." He was quiet for a moment. "Does anyone know I come?" he asked. She set the chart back in its slot on the wall. "Just me," she said. "And her." 28 days had passed since Daniel Carter walked into the wrong room. He had not counted them deliberately. His body had learned the number the way hands learn a door handle they touch every morning without thought. He found the poetry book 3 weeks in, on a donation cart near the hospital chapel. Its spine had cracked in several places, like a sentence interrupted mid-thought. Inside the front cover, a name was written in blue ink so faded it was closer to memory than language. Margaret, 1987. He did not know Margaret. He carried the book in a room 510 anyway. He read slowly to Vanessa Cole. Not performing. He read the way you set a table for someone you are certain will arrive. The poem was Robert Frost. He had read 3 others before it. She had lain still through all of them, her breathing tracked by the soft percussion of the monitor to her left. He was 4 stanzas in when he stopped. Not because of sound. Something at the edge of his vision didn't match the stillness he had memorized. He looked at her right hand against the white sheet. Her index finger had moved. It was the smallest possible motion, a slow curl inward, like a question mark forming from scratch, like a hand half remembering the shape of something it had once held. He looked at her face. Her eyelids were not still. They shifted beneath themselves, searching the way eyes move inside a dream that is becoming more than a dream. Daniel set the book in his lap. For one suspended moment, he was only a man in a room where something enormous had quietly begun, unwilling to interrupt it with the noise of himself. Then he was on his feet and through the door, calling down the corridor at a volume that carried nothing of the hospital's careful quiet. A nurse turned. A second followed. A third appeared from 2 doors down. Within 4 minutes, the attending physician was at Vanessa Cole's bedside. Within 30, the room had been rearranged by equipment and focused intention and the energy of a medical team confronting something the chart had not predicted. The doctors used the word remarkable. They used it carefully, the way professionals use language when a chart says one thing and a patient's eyes are saying another. Her neurological response was stronger than the imaging had suggested. Her cognitive function appeared largely intact. The attending physician, Dr. Okonkwo, who wore her stethoscope looped twice and always seemed to be solving a problem no one else had noticed yet, stood in the doorway after the assessments and said, quietly, to no one in particular, 7 weeks. She should not be this coherent. A nurse named Lily stood just behind her. Lily said nothing. Her eyes moved to the string lights along the window ledge and then to the crayon drawing taped to the wall beside the monitor at a crooked angle. Ava had made it 2 Sundays before, insisting on leaving it. For the lady who is sleeping, she had said, with the gravity of a child filing an official report. A yellow sun, a figure in a bed, and what looked like a bird, until Ava corrected that. It was a butterfly. It meant the lady was going to wake up. Ava had said this as established fact, not as hope. Lily had her own theory about what had brought Vanessa Cole back from that long, quiet distance. She kept it to herself. 2 days later, Daniel arrived after a shift at Hargrove Technical Solutions, still wearing his lanyard. He sat in the chair with the wobbly left leg, bracing it with his foot the way he always did now, without thinking. He said hello to the room first. He always said hello to the room first. Then he said hello to her. He opened the poetry book to the page marked with a candy wrapper Ava had left in his coat pocket. He had read 3 lines. The voice that came was rough and slow. It was the sound of something that had traveled a very long distance and arrived precisely where it had been trying to go. What Vanessa Cole said, in a voice like gravel and rust and the first cautious strike of a match, was, "You kept singing." Her eyes opened at 9:20 on a Tuesday morning. Daniel was in the chair by the window, finishing a sandwich Ava had packed for him the night before. He heard the monitor pitch change. He set the sandwich on the bedside tray and sat forward. Vanessa Cole was watching him. Her eyes were dark and fully open, carrying the alertness of a mind that had never stopped. She didn't reach for a call button. She didn't make a sound. She looked at him the way a person looks after weeks of careful, solitary observation. He leaned forward in the chair and held her gaze. "You're back," he said. She breathed in slowly. Her voice came out rough from weeks of silence, but the words arrived with precision. "Every night," she said. "I heard every night." He nodded. "I wasn't certain you could," he said. "I hoped." She looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at him. The monitors held their calm and patient rhythm. Something wheeled past in the hall outside, ordinary and indifferent to this room. The tears came without announcement. They moved across her temples and into her hair. She made no move to stop them. Her hands stayed open at her sides. She released them the way you release something you have held so long you stopped counting the cost. "You said I wasn't alone," she told him. "You weren't," he said. She looked at him for a long time. Her attention had been refined by weeks of listening into something precise and unhurried. "Do you know who I am?" she asked. Not as a test. Genuinely. He shook his head. "No," he said. "I didn't think to ask." Something moved across her expression. Not quite a smile. The shape of one. Eventually. "My name is Vanessa Cole," she said. "I chair the foundation board of this hospital. I run a technology company in 6 cities. You have been on payroll there for 2 years, apparently." He let that settle. He looked around the room without hurry. White walls, quiet equipment, thin winter light through the blinds. Then his eyes moved to Ava's drawing taped beside the 4-stand. Stars, a sleeping figure, a sun with small, careful eyelashes, drawn by a child who had never met this woman and had drawn for her anyway. He looked back at Vanessa. "I knew you were a person alone in a room," he said. "That was enough. The rest belongs to you." She cried then. hard and without apology. The grief behind it wasn't new, but the space for it was, and that difference matters. It didn't look like weakness. It looked like something that had been kept behind a door for a very long time. Kept sealed through board meetings, red-eye flights. Every room where tears would have cost her something she could not afford. A nurse appeared in the doorway, took one quiet look, and withdrew. When Vanessa had steadied herself, her eyes moved to the drawing on the wall. She studied it with full attention. "Who made that?" she said. "My daughter," Daniel said. "Ava. She's 8 years old. She has never been in this room. She made it at home and asked me to bring it. She said a person sleeping alone in a hospital deserves something on the wall." Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. "I had a daughter who made me drawings," she said, "when she was small. Little figures with round heads and too many fingers. Suns in the corners, the way children draw them when they trust the world to be warm." She paused. She looked at her hands as if she was relearning them. She stopped around 9 or 10. "I was overseas that month. A product launch in Singapore. When I got home, the drawings from her bedroom window were gone. Her desk was clear. I noticed. I was tired from the flight. I told myself I would ask her about it the next morning." She said nothing more for a moment. Daniel didn't fill the space. The room held the quiet without strain. Outside, the hospital went on doing its ordinary work. In here, for the moment, things were allowed to take the time they needed. "I never asked her," Vanessa said. Her voice was steady. She was saying it out loud for perhaps the first time in a room that had decided not to charge her for it. The curtain along the window track had been pulled halfway. A bar of afternoon light lay across the foot of Vanessa's bed and stopped there. The monitors ran their quiet rhythms. A nurse had mentioned she was ahead of schedule. Vanessa received this the way she received most information, with civil neutrality. Daniel Carter had a discharge checklist under one arm and legitimate business 2 doors down. He paused at her door anyway. She had been awake 4 days. He had stopped in twice, briefly, carrying the practiced decency of a man who understood that waking was its own long work. She said, "Come in," before he knocked. She told him about her daughter first. Not the company, not the decisions made during her absence. Her daughter had flown from Atlanta the morning after Vanessa opened her eyes. 23 years old, still pausing in doorways the way she had since she was small, checking first whether she was wanted. Vanessa said this toward the bar of light, not toward him. "I kept moving the call," she said. "After this quarter, after this acquisition, after this meeting. I kept borrowing time I hadn't yet earned." Daniel didn't move to fill the silence. Some silences are containers, not gaps. Speaking into them too quickly breaks what they hold. "She came the morning after I woke," Vanessa said, "before visiting hours. The nurses let her through. He said, that's what they do." She looked at him. "I'm beginning to see that," she said. Then, without ceremony, she asked about Ava, whether his daughter was all right on the nights his shift ran late. It was a plain question, and he was briefly caught by how directly it arrived. He told her about Mrs. Paulette, 2 buildings from his apartment, a retired school librarian who kept shortbread on the counter year-round. Ava had started leaving her library books there on purpose, one at a time, as an excuse to come back. He smiled when he said it. Small, unguarded, before he'd had time to arrange his expression. Vanessa said, "You told me about the permission slip." He went still. "The one with the ketchup stain along the bottom edge," she said. "You'd signed it at the dinner table before you noticed. You said Ava had already moved on. She'd found a crayon under the refrigerator and was drawing planets on the kitchen floor." He said quietly, "You heard all of that." She said, "All of it. The braid tutorial you kept bookmarked and couldn't quite get right. The way she falls asleep mid-sentence and won't admit she was tired. Every word you said in that room. You spoke to me as if I were still whole." He looked at her with something that held its shape between composure and the edge of it. He said, "I didn't know anyone was there." She said, "I know. That's exactly why it mattered." 3 days later, Vanessa Cole was sitting up with a tablet on the tray table, reviewing quarterly operations data and marking the margins in red. The 4 lines were gone. Her complexion had recovered its warmth, a rich and settled brown, and the exhaustion that had pressed her flat in those first waking hours was lifting the way fog lifts off pavement, steadily, without announcement. The attending physician used the word remarkable. She appeared to mean it in the clinical sense. Her assistant, Preston, arrived that afternoon in a pressed pale blue shirt, laptop already open. He had held things together for 8 weeks on obligation and cold coffee. He began listing priorities before he'd properly sat down. She let him run for 40 minutes, then raised one hand. "You've done well," she said. "Take the hallway. Give me an hour." He found a chair in the corridor and sat in it carefully, the way a person sits when they are finally allowed to stop. Vanessa turned back to the report. She read with the deliberate attention of a woman who had recently been reminded that attention was not guaranteed. She made her notes. She sent 2 brief, precise emails. Then she set the tablet face down and looked at the ceiling. By every clinical measure, she was ahead of schedule. But in a place beneath the efficiency, somewhere quarterly data had never quite reached. A door remained open, and she did not move to close it. Neither of them knew, that afternoon, that a train ticket had already been purchased. 19 years old, traveling from New York. Dark eyes and a question that had been forming for 2 weeks. She was not arriving gently. She was not arriving for a visit. The nurses spoke of Vanessa Cole in careful, half-astonished tones. Her readings climbed through January's first week in a way no one wanted to name too directly. The attending physician wrote remarkable in his chart and left it there. The woman in the bed was telling a different story than the instruments. She tracked faces when people came in. She asked for water in whole sentences. She held the 4 lines steady while the nurse adjusted the port. The charge nurse paused in the open doorway a moment longer than her rounds required. Daniel arrived every evening after his shift in Mercy General's maintenance wing. He wore his work coat most nights, the collar carrying traces of floor polish and antiseptic. He knocked twice on the open door, the same knock each time. Vanessa turned her tablet over without looking up. Neither had named the arrangement. He sat in the chair beside the window. Some nights he talked. Some nights she did. On the quiet nights, neither said much, and neither felt the absence of it. He mentioned Ava on the 3rd evening after Vanessa fully regained speech. She had asked him plainly why he stayed that first night, in a room that wasn't his to be in. He told her about Ava sitting cross-legged in the corridor. She had been filling the backs of old brochures with penciled constellations while he sang. Ava had looked up when he came out and asked whether the woman liked the singing. Because he couldn't tell, an 8-year-old the woman hadn't heard a word. He'd said yes. Vanessa was quiet a long moment. Then she said, "She sounds like someone worth paying attention to." She left it there, and he didn't push. On the last gray Tuesday of January, she asked him to sit before he'd removed his coat. She was holding a check flat in the center of her palm. He took it, looked at the number, and folded it once along its crease. He set it on the nightstand beside the tablet. "No," he said. She said, "Excuse me?" He said it again, quietly, without ceremony. He hadn't spent 29 evenings expecting a return on something. He came because no person should sit alone in a room like this in January. Boston moves too fast to leave anyone that's still. He said it the way a man says what he has decided not to walk back. Vanessa sat with that long after he left. 37 years in rooms where everyone wanted something before introductions were finished. Donors wanting naming rights. Executives wanting proximity. Not once had anyone returned her money because they genuinely hadn't come for anything. She had no shape to put around it. She called her daughter from the hospital room that night. City lights bled amber and blue through the frost on the window glass. Naomi Cole arrived on the first morning flight from LaGuardia. She was 20, with her mother's jaw and her own careful stillness. It was the kind of quiet assembled early, when warmth from strangers tends to carry conditions. She had grown up in good apartments and attended good schools. Capable, temporary people had raised her largely while her mother ran the company. She didn't blame Vanessa for it, but she had absorbed what no one taught directly. Trust was a choice made with evidence, not extended by default. She got the story from Marcus, the overnight maintenance supervisor, before she went near room 412. The wrong room. 29 evenings. A daughter named Ava sketching stars in the hallway. A check returned undeposited. Naomi listened without changing her expression. Then she walked upstairs and looked at Daniel Carter with eyes that had been measuring strangers for years. She said, "Who are you exactly?" Not hostile, more precise than hostile. The voice of a woman who had decided the wrong answer would confirm everything she suspected. She was still, underneath that decision, hoping to be wrong. Daniel rose from the chair beside the window without hurrying. The woman in the doorway wore a charcoal blazer pressed flat as a page. She had not set her bag down and did not intend to. Her eyes moved across the room and landed on him. They did not soften. "You must be Jordan," he said. She walked to the center of the room. Light from the window divided across the tile floor, one half warm, one half cold. Her voice, when it came, had been composed well in advance. "Tell me your name and your position here." Vanessa lay propped against two pillows on the far side of the bed, watching them both with eyes that had spent 7 weeks learning patience. "Daniel Carter," he said. "Facilities maintenance. I came into this room 4 weeks ago by mistake. Wrong room. I didn't want her to be alone." He stopped, then started again. "That's the whole of it." "That is not the whole of it." Her voice was controlled. Beneath the control, something trembled, but she was practiced at keeping the surface still. "Nobody comes back 30 nights for nothing. Nobody refuses a settlement for nothing. Tell me what you actually want from her." Daniel breathed once, slowly, through his nose. Ava had learned that particular breath. It meant he was selecting the next word rather than the wrong one. He looked at Jordan not with anger, but with something quieter and harder. The look of a man who has been misread so many times that being misread no longer surprises him. "Nothing," he said. "Not from her. Not from you." He lifted his jacket from the back of the chair. He folded it over his arm. He looked once at Vanessa, not asking permission, only saying what needed to be said without words. Then he nodded and walked to the door. "I'll have legal counsel review your employment file," Jordan said from behind him. "If anything fails to match what you've told me today, the appropriate parties will be informed." Daniel stopped at the door. When he turned, his face held no performance. "I understand," he said quietly. "I understand exactly why you'd think that." He left. The door settled closed behind him. The monitor beside the bed counted time in pale numbers. "You were wrong," Vanessa said. Not loudly, not with heat, just the level voice of a woman who had spent 7 weeks motionless and had grown very certain of certain things. Jordan turned toward the bed. "I heard him," Vanessa said. 31 nights. Every song, every word he said to a woman he believed couldn't hear him. She paused, and her hands lay folded on the white sheet. He talked about his daughter, the way she draws at the kitchen table before school, the way she hums to herself when she thinks no one is listening. He talked about the morning he sat in his truck in a parking garage because he didn't know how to go home to a kitchen without his wife in it. Her voice stayed even. Her eyes did not. That is not a performance. That is a person. And you treated him the way every powerful rune treats someone like him, as if he must be running an angle, because who would simply help someone without one? Jordan said nothing. Her composure held, though holding it cost her something. "I did the same thing," Vanessa said. "For years. To everyone who walked through any door I controlled. It is a very organized way to live. It is also a very lonely one." She looked at her hands. "I know because I lived it. And I had 7 weeks with nothing to do but understand what it cost me." The silence between them carried real weight now. Then Jordan's eyes moved, almost despite herself, to the far wall. A child's drawing was taped there, slightly crooked, one corner peeling away from the tape. A tall man, drawn in brown crayon with long arms. A woman lying down with her eyes closed. And all around them, pressed hard into the paper in thick yellow strokes, stars. Dozens of them. The kind a child draws when she wants to make sure the dark around someone is not empty. Ava had never met Vanessa Cole. She had drawn stars for her anyway. Something moved behind Jordan's eyes. Just a small, interior shift. Not yet a decision, but it was the beginning of something. The apartment on Meridian Street felt smaller after 9 o'clock. The city outside had gone quiet, and there was nothing between Daniel Carter and his own thoughts. He sat on the couch with Ava pressed to his left side and Marcus, 5, already asleep, slumped warm against his right. A film played on the television, soft and wintry, something his mother had been recommending since November. He had meant to watch it with her. Tonight, it only filled the silence. He wasn't watching it. He was watching past the screen, where the weight of the evening had settled. Ava tilted her head back the way she always did when she was reading him rather than the room. Her father's face was her oldest map. "Dad," she said, "you look sad." He pulled her closer. Her hair smelled of lavender shampoo she had chosen herself from the drugstore shelf, and underneath that, faint as a held breath, the ghost of crayons. He had always loved that combination, not because it was beautiful, but because it was real. It was the smell of his actual life, the one that still made sense. "I'm learning something," he said. She waited. Ava had the patience of a child who understood that her father's sentences sometimes needed room to arrive. "What?" she asked. "That doing the right thing and being understood for it don't always come together." She was quiet, turning this over. Then, "Marcus says good people get misunderstood." Daniel glanced at the boy beside him. One sock half off, mouth open. Marcus is 5. He watches a lot of documentaries. The laugh that came out of Daniel was short and unplanned, the kind that arrives one step ahead of tears and sometimes goes in their place. He pressed his face into Ava's hair and held there. He breathed in lavender and crayon wax, the smell of his actual life. "Yeah," he said, "your brother's right." She leaned back into him and said nothing else. She didn't need to. Later, both children were asleep. He stayed still. He sat in the particular quiet of a man who does not want to disturb the only warm thing in the room. The radiator knocked once in its corner. The refrigerator held its low, steady hum. On Meridian Street, a car passed, swept its headlights across the ceiling, and was gone. He thought about Ava pressing yellow paper stars to a stranger's hospital wall because she believed it would help. He thought about Marcus bent over his crayons with the focused gravity of someone for whom making a mark was its own sufficient purpose. He thought about the people his children were quietly becoming, not from instruction, but from watching him move through his days. He thought, "I must be doing something right." And then, kindness sometimes costs you. You pay anyway, because the alternative is becoming someone your children would not recognize. Someone who calculates and withholds himself from other people's pain because the numbers don't favor it. He had decided he would not be that man before he ever sang a note in the wrong hospital room. He would decide it again in the morning. What he could not have imagined, sitting in that settled quiet, television still running, both children warm against him, was that the answer to every cost he had absorbed was already building. Not in any courtroom, not in any conversation he had access to. It was building in the ICU of Massachusetts General Hospital, 3 floors above the corridor where he worked, inside a bank of backup systems that had not been stress-tested since October. At 11 minutes past 11, the auxiliary ventilator network began to fail. No alarm came first. A single monitor went orange in a corridor most staff passed without slowing. Then a second. Then the cascade moved through the backup panel the way current moves once it has found its path. The final sound was mechanical and definitive, like a decision long since made. 3 patients were on full ventilator support. The primary line would hold for 40 minutes, perhaps 50, not beyond that. The engineering team arrived in 11 minutes. 8 people pulling up schematics, moving in the precise silence of professionals who understood exactly what the next half hour required of them. The engineering team had been in the corridor since before midnight, and by 1:38 in the morning the work had taken something out of every face in the hallway. They moved in the compressed, clipped manner of people who understand that the clock is not a figure of speech tonight. Douglas Haynes, the head of the team, had spent 22 years in this field and had built a reputation on never encountering a problem he would describe as being beyond him. He stepped back from the open panel at 1:38 and looked at his senior technician and said 2 things without cushioning or editorial. There was a contractor, and someone needed to wake him up. The contractor was 2 hours out by interstate. Vanessa Cole had been standing in the 4th floor corridor for close to 40 minutes. Her physician had come twice. He had noted both times that she was technically still a patient and that her paperwork had not been signed and the second time he had said it, he had used the particular tone that physicians develop over years of being ignored by people whose names are on buildings. She had listened, and she had not moved. No one on the engineering team said a word to her about it. No one from the board said anything either. 3 of them had come up from the lobby, the CFO and 2 directors, and they were gathered at the far edge of the hallway with the frozen quality of professionals who excel at managing problems that respond to management and had tonight encountered one that did not. Vanessa looked at them once and returned her attention to the panel. She looked at the clock above the fire door. She looked at the bundled cables pulled from the access housing, the burned relay sitting dark and isolated on a cart beside the wall. She thought about 3 rooms on the floor above her. 3 machines cycling air through tubes and lines. 3 people lying in the mechanical patience of sedation. No voice in any of those rooms except what came from a monitor. No hand in theirs. Then she thought about a different room. White walls. 1 window with parking lot light pressing through the edges of the blinds. A hand resting alone on a white sheet in a room that contained nothing warm, nothing personal, nothing that confirmed the person inside it was known to anyone outside it. She had not been conscious when it happened. She had heard the recording later, the one Ava had made on a small phone held at an odd angle against a plastic chair, the audio slightly unsteady, the voice on it entirely certain. And she had felt something in the room shift even then, through whatever the sedation and the long, slow return had done to her sense of time and place. She had spent 20 years reading rooms. The 7 weeks had clarified something she had been moving toward without knowing it. You did not discharge your responsibility to a building full of people by monitoring them from a managed and respectable distance. You discharged it by knowing them. By being in the corridor at 2 in the morning when the corridor required you, whether or not it was on anyone's schedule, whether or not anyone had sent for you. She looked down the hall. Daniel Carter was at the far end of it, pushing a supply cart toward the utility closet with the quiet, unhurried pace of a man who had decided that his job was worth doing without making it a demonstration. The Mercy Regional logo sat on the left chest of his uniform. He had come back to work the overnight shift without announcement, without waiting for anything to be resolved or confirmed, because this was his job and this was what he did. He had not seen her yet. Vanessa started walking. He heard her footsteps, turned, and took the whole scene in with one slow pass. The engineers at the open panel. The board members at the corridor's edge. The particular quality of silence that settles into a hospital hallway when something has gone concretely and seriously wrong. He looked at her. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. It was not a reprimand. It was the immediate reflex of someone who thought of her, before anything else, as a patient. She shook her head. "The backup ventilators are down," she said. 3 patients upstairs. Engineering has been working for 3 hours. The contractor is 2 hours out. He did not look at the board members. He did not look at Douglas or the technicians bent over the housing. He held her eyes for a moment with the same plain, uncomplicated steadiness she imagined he had carried into an empty and dark room 7 weeks ago before he decided to step across the threshold. Then he turned and looked at the panel. The corridor held the kind of quiet that forms when everyone present understands something is either about to be fixed or it isn't. Vanessa Cole stood near the doorway of the utility access room with her arms folded and her eyes on Daniel Carter, the way you look at a person when you have had 7 weeks to learn what real attention feels like. She said, "I know you've worked this floor for 4 years." Daniel didn't answer right away. He was looking at the supply cart, not avoiding her, just the way a man looks at a thing he knows how to use. She continued, "I know you repaired equipment last winter that the service report listed as beyond salvage." She paused. "I'm not asking because of your job title. I'm not asking because of anything that happened in that room with my husband's people. I watched you in that hallway when you didn't know anyone was watching. You see what's broken and you fix it. Not for the credit, because it's the right thing." He looked up then. "Board 7, he said. She blinked. "What?" "Same cascade failure pattern as the 3rd floor backup in 2022. Board 7 reads partially active, so the automated diagnostic logs it as stable and moves on. But a partial active reading in that configuration isn't stable. It's a fault hiding in plain sight." She stepped aside without another word. He took the voltage meter and a flathead screwdriver from the lower shelf of the cart and walked to the panel room at the far end of the corridor. The door swung shut behind him. The hallway went still. Marcus Chun, the facilities director who had supervised Daniel's hiring and twice approved his performance reviews without reading them, stood near the nursing station with his sleeves rolled to the elbow and his phone dark in his hand. Dr. Elaine Ford, the night attending, had stopped halfway through updating a chart and had not gone back to it. Garrett Wills, the CFO, who had stood at an all-staff meeting the previous spring and said, without quite looking at Daniel, that maintenance personnel should please direct operational concerns through the appropriate chain, stood near the stairwell door with his jacket still buttoned. 9 minutes passed. The ventilators came back online at 1:54 in the morning. The sound was quiet and specific, the steady mechanical exhale of 3 machines resuming the work they had briefly stopped. Someone in the hallway made a small, involuntary sound. Then Marcus started clapping. Then Dr. Ford, then the nurses. Then Garrett Wills, whose hands came together slowly at first, the way a man claps when he is also sitting with something uncomfortable about himself. Daniel came out of the panel room with the screwdriver in one hand and the voltage meter in the other. He set them both on the cart. He did not look at Garrett Wills. He did not scan the hallway with any expression that suggested he had been waiting for exactly this. He looked like a man whose attention had already moved past the panel room to the 3 rooms at the corridor's far end where 3 patients were breathing steadily again and where no one, as far as he knew, had thought to go sit beside them. He said, quietly, to no one in particular, someone should check on room 14. That was all. The door at the corridor's far end opened then, and Vanessa walked in. She had a paper cup of water in one hand and a hospital blanket folded over her forearm, because the discharge team had told her she was not to carry anything heavier than that yet, and she had paid careful attention to only the first part of that instruction. She had been at the nurse's station. She had heard every minute of it. She stood under the fluorescent light that buzzed faintly on its left side, and she looked at Daniel. Not at the people still applauding. Not at Garrett Wills, who was now looking at the floor with the expression of a man reviewing a recent decision. At Daniel. What happened next was not something either of them had arranged. The decision came without announcement, the way the most honest decisions do. Vanessa Cole had been lying in the recovery room they had moved her to after the ICU. Room 318, facing east over the hospital's stone courtyard and a single oak shedding its early autumn leaves. And she had not been thinking, exactly. That was the part she could not explain later, even to herself. Her body had simply risen. Her hand had reached for the coat her assistant draped over the chair back 2 days earlier, and then she was in the corridor before any reasoning part of her had formed an opinion about it. She had learned this about herself over years, the one spent building Cole Technologies from a leased server room in Midtown into something that moved markets and made people careful around her. Some actions must be taken before the thinking begins. The thinking will always manufacture a reason to wait. She had the full shape of the story now. It had taken 4 days after she regained consciousness and had come in pieces, from Brianna on the overnight nursing staff, who touched her own earlobe when she was uncertain about how much to say, and from a facilities coordinator who had not known who Vanessa was when he mentioned it in passing, and finally from her own daughter, who held Vanessa's hand and chose her words with a care that told Vanessa the full account was worse than the partial one. A man named Daniel Carter. A widower, a father. His daughter Ava was 8 years old and small for her age, and she had been sitting in a waiting area chair outside the ICU at 3 in the morning because she would not leave the building without him. Daniel had walked into room 412 instead of room 414, where his late wife had once been treated, and he had stood at the foot of Vanessa's bed in the dark and sung. He had sung to her the way a person sings to someone they cannot stop loving, even when love no longer has a destination. And the night shift charge nurse had filed a complaint, and the administrator had issued a written notice, and Daniel Carter had been walked off the premises by security as though he were a threat rather than a grieving man who had simply made a wrong turn in the dark. She had not slept well since learning it. The corridor outside room 318 was busy at mid-morning, shift change not quite finished, a dietary cart rattling across the linoleum near the nurse's station. Vanessa walked past all of it. She had not called ahead. She had not sent her assistant or her foundation director or any of the 12 people whose purpose it was to manage the distance between her and the world. She had simply walked. Brianna had said Daniel Carter would be near the East Junction panel, asked there by the facilities manager to assess a rewiring concern. A small thing, framed as a small thing, though Vanessa suspected several people in this building had quietly arranged his presence in this specific corridor at this specific hour without fully understanding why they had done so. He was standing with his back half-turned, a clipboard against his forearm, in conversation with a facilities technician. She recognized him from the photograph her daughter had found. The careful, settled way he held himself. The expression of a man who had already decided what kind of person he was going to be and had stopped revisiting the question. The hospital administrator was 20 feet behind her, pretending to review a chart. 2 nurses had stopped moving. Vanessa felt all of it, the held breath, the collective awareness of something being made permanent. And she did not slow down. She went on her knees on the corridor linoleum. Not slowly, not with ceremony. Down, coat and all, the cold tile pressing through the fabric, in front of whoever cared to witness it. "I'm sorry," she said. The voice that came out was not the one she used on conference stages or before regulatory committees. It was smaller than that and had no architecture to it. It was simply true. "I was told you had been removed from this building. I was told it in language designed to sound protective, and I accepted it because I was frightened and not thinking clearly, and you were still a stranger to me." She stopped. "None of that is an explanation. I am sorry for what was done in my name." Daniel Carter looked down at her for a long moment. He looked the way a person looks at something they're taking a moment to verify is real. "Please get up," he said quietly. She did. It took a moment, and he did not reach to help her, which she understood as a form of respect, the allowing of a person to complete the difficult thing they have started. "You didn't make that call," he said when she was standing. "The administrator made it. I run this foundation," she said. "The people who made that decision answer to me. That makes it mine to carry." He was quiet, not the quiet of a man who disagreed. The quiet of a man deciding whether to offer the next honest thing to someone who had just shown him they could hold it. She looked past his shoulder then, toward the far end of the corridor. Ava Carter was perched on the low ledge beneath the east window, small in her blue jacket, her sneakers barely reaching the linoleum. She was watching her father. Her expression was composed and careful and held everything it had witnessed. The way a child's face will when the child has already learned that some moments are too large for sound or movement. When Vanessa's eyes found hers, Ava did not look away. Ava walked into the sunroom ahead of her father, the way she always did when certain about something. The afternoon light came through the south-facing glass in long, pale rectangles. Vanessa sat near the window in the chair her physical therapist preferred, hands folded, her posture already reclaiming the steadiness it had always carried. Ava stopped a few feet away and studied her the way she studied everything, head tilted, mouth pressed quiet. She held out a folded piece of paper. The creases had gone soft from handling. "You left it," Ava said, "when you were sleeping. I drew it for you and put it on your tray. Then you were moved and nobody knew, and I kept it." Vanessa unfolded it with both hands. A hospital room in crayon, the bed, the monitors, the window with its view of the parking structure. A woman lying down with her eyes closed. A man beside her with his mouth open. A small girl standing with her arms folded, watching him. In the corner of the paper, as Ava always did, she had drawn a sun with 9 radiating lines. Vanessa was quiet for a long time. Something moved across her face the way light moves when a cloud shifts and the room briefly changes without anyone deciding it should. "I would have asked for it," she said finally. She folded it carefully along its original lines. "If anyone had told me it existed, I would have asked for it that same day." Ava considered this. She appeared satisfied in the particular way of someone whose gesture has landed exactly where it was aimed. She sat in the chair beside Vanessa and turned to look out at the courtyard without making it any kind of event. She was 8 years old, and she understood when a moment did not need explaining. Daniel stood in the doorway and watched his daughter settle herself beside this woman and felt something loosen in his chest. He understood, the way he had understood most things this past year, that this moment did not need him inside it. He moved to the east window at the end of the corridor and looked out over the hospital's lower campus, where the oak trees along the outer path were beginning to show new green at the tips of their branches. He was still standing there when Vanessa came to find him. She moved more carefully than she had before. One hand tracked the wall edge as she walked, though she had told him the therapist said she was ahead of schedule. She had not seemed particularly surprised by this information. "There is something I want to tell you," she said. She stopped beside him at the window. "Before you knew my name, before anyone with a badge had a chance to tell you what board I chaired or who I could make uncomfortable with a single phone call. You came into that room, and you stayed, and you sang because the room needed it. You were kind to me when there was nothing I could offer you. Nothing at all." He looked at the oak trees. He did not say anything. "No one has done that for me," she said. "Not in a very long time. The people around me calculate. It is not malicious. It is simply how that world operates. But you did not calculate. You did not know there was anything to calculate. I know what it feels like," he said quietly, "to not be worth calculating for." She looked at him. "I fell in love with you," she said, "somewhere in those weeks while I was still gone, listening to your voice without being able to say anything back. I fell in love with who you were when you thought no one important was watching." He let out a slow breath. He did not look away from the trees. "I have been alone a long time," he said. "Longer than Ava understands. I stopped believing that would change." She reached over and took his hand. He looked down at it, her hand in his, and something in him settled. The specific settling of a space that has been holding its breath for a long time and is finally, quietly, allowed to exhale. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening in early March, the hospital's south garden held close to 60 people. Nurse Dara had helped string lights through the bare branches of the sycamores along the path. The small battery-powered kind, warm white, the same one sold in the craft aisle for a few dollars a strand. Vanessa had specified them exactly, down to the color temperature. Daniel had laughed and said, "Of course you did." She had not apologized. The folding chairs were filled with hospital staff and 2 board members who had stayed after the last vote, and Daniel's mother, who had come in her good wool coat and brought a dish of sweet potato pudding she set on the folding table without ceremony, as though this were something she had been preparing to do for a long time and had simply been waiting for the right occasion. In the front row, Ava sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching all of it with the particular attention of someone who intends to remember. The kitchen of Daniel Carter's house on Maple Grove had never been quite loud enough. For 3 years after the loss, he had done what fathers do. He filled the silence with breakfast smells and weekend music and a careful performance of being fine. He was not always fine, but he was always there. That was the thing Vanessa Cole came to understand slowly in the months since she had woken and learned the full shape of what had happened in room 412. She had heard his voice before she heard anything else. That was the fact of it. Before the monitors steadied and the light stopped hurting. Before she had words for what she was, or who, or where, there had been a man's voice in the dark, low and unhurried, singing the same melody every night as though he expected nothing back from it. She had held onto that voice the way a climber holds a fixed line in the dark. Not because it promised her anything, because it was there. She had woken. She had listened to what they had done to him. She had made the calls that needed to be made, not out of fury, but out of the particular clarity that belongs to people who have been close to silence and come back from it. Some things were corrected. Some people were reminded that power looks different from a hospital bed. And then she had called him, not as the foundation chair, not as the woman who remembered his voice, but simply as herself. She had asked if he would like coffee. He had said yes. That had been 2 months ago. Now, she stood at his front door on a Saturday in October, holding a jar of honey from the farmer's market on Callaway Street, because Ava had mentioned in passing twice that she liked it in her tea. Vanessa had written that down. She wrote things down now. Presence, she had learned, required attention, and attention required the small, specific acts that told a person, "I see you," as yourself. Ava opened the door before Daniel could reach it. She had been watching from the window since 11:30, and she saw no reason to pretend otherwise. "You brought the honey," she said. "Dad." She remembered about the honey. Daniel appeared in the hallway, a dish towel folded over one arm. He looked at Vanessa steadily, without reaching. "Come in," he said. "Everything's warm." The kitchen smelled of something baked. A drawing Ava had made was taped beside the refrigerator. 3 figures standing close together under a yellow sun. No labels necessary. Vanessa looked at it for a moment longer than she had intended to. They ate at the table by the window. The afternoon came in low and golden across the wood grain. Ava told a very long story about a dog she had seen on Tuesday, and both adults listened with full attention. And sometimes they glanced at each other across the table, and something moved between them that was not love yet, but was leaning steadily toward it. The way a room warms before you feel on your skin. On her way out, Ava pressed a folded drawing into Vanessa's hands. "In case you get lonely tonight," she said simply. Daniel watched Vanessa tuck it carefully in her coat pocket, near where a heart would be. He did not say anything. Some things do not need naming. They only need to be kept.